Ooh. Welcome to the Church of Mabus radio show. It's Friday night. It's 7:08 p.m. Central. You're listening to United Public Radio 107.7 FM New Orleans. We got Wham representing here with us tonight up in New York City.
Well, not New York City.
I always mess that up. Hudson Valley.
Well, right now I'm in Albany, but yes, I'm not in New York City.
And tell us about your new audiobook real fast.
Yes, my book, Mysterious Beauty, Living with the Paranormal in the Hudson Valley, is now available in Audible. And you can listen to it anywhere. Right now, they're having a special promotion. I'll post this again to your Facebook page, but I've got a special link that if you link to it, you could listen for free.
Cool. So, and I got a copy, and it's good. Everybody check it out. Tonight's guest, Al Goingback. It's great to have you here, Al.
Thank you for having me, guys. How you doing?
And doing pretty good, sort of. Hanging in there. Moshing to the apocalypse, for sure. It's definitely
it's
crazy.
Scary out here.
Yeah, definitely. So, Al, that's your name, right? That's your real name, or is it a pen name?
No, that's my real name. It's on my birth certificate, driver's license, passport. Yeah.
Cool.
It's one of those crazy names that opens it up to all kinds of jokes and stuff. Like he's going way back.
I bet so. Is it your power animal too, as well? The owl.
Yeah. Owls are actually bad luck for my tribe. It's
really?
Owl comes around, we go running. So I guess maybe that's why I know the name. I'm bad luck for everybody.
I've heard that too about owls being bad luck. But in paranormal, they usually are like a signal before you get alien abducted. Like they come around and stuff.
Well, that's what they say. Owls are not what they seem.
They're neat.
As it is in Twin Peaks.
And here where I'm at in Graceville, Florida, they are outside at night. So creepy. It's freaky. There's so many of them at night. Like there's a lot. And we have a little chihuahua, so you have to be careful. No, we've had no problems, but there's so many. I've never, since moving here, I've heard them, and it's eerie. I like it, but it's definitely they make some eerie noises at night for sure. And I can remember coming across your, go ahead.
I was saying, I love hearing owls are beautiful, but then after I hear them, I'm like, am I going to die tomorrow? What did that mean? Why did he call out? Did he just call my name?
Yeah, they definitely sound creepy. Well, one of the big reasons why I do this show, just to give you the breakdown, because I know you deal with supernatural and you like paranormal and cryptids and things, is when I was younger at 17, I went through testicular cancer and had to go through chemo and lost one in the war. And I'm fine now at 47. But a few years after that, my dad died. So it was a lot of crap at one time. And I started to have a lot of weird experiences with seeing stuff in the sky that was different, that was UFO, or I don't know what some of it was, but it was definitely weird stuff. And even some strange type beings that I've seen. Like I've seen beings of light completely sober leave my house. At Silver Lake in Marianna, Florida, I went outside and turned, and it was like two were in there and had flown out and left. I don't know if they were deceased loved ones, aliens, or angels, or what they were, but somehow that suffering opened my senses, I think. And I also say I've seen them while partying, so I've seen them sober and partying. But just different things have happened, and I started to interview people about these subjects that, there was a time when I was having trouble getting interviews, and I said a prayer, and I saw a strange UFO sighting I call red fireflies, and I screamed, and my brother and nephew, and they saw them. I don't know what they were, but next thing you know, I'm on the phone with Stanton Friedman, nuclear physicist on UFOs. He's passed now. Jim Mars, the dude that did the JFK movie and an Alien Agenda book. I started interviewing greats. It was kind of like a synchronicity like that. I was like, did aliens help me, get these interviews? I don't know, but it was just weird. So that's when we do the show. Just weird stuff happened to us. So you're in good company for sure. And Wham, she could
Very
go on
good.
and on about weird stuff that's happened to her on
Yeah.
many different levels. But I know I came across your books when I was younger and loved them. And the last one I read was Coyote Rage. How does the paranormal and supernatural fit in with your books? Have you had personal experiences, or has been someone you've been interested in? Because I know that's part of a big element of your books.
Well, yeah, the paranormal, I was kind of raised in it. I mean, with the native culture, we're firm believers in spirit guides and ghosts and our ancestors coming back. We do medicine ceremonies, we do the sweat lodges, the vision quest. So it was around me the whole time. My aunt was gifted, another term for psychic. And I tried my entire life to prove her wrong. But she was always correct. And we wouldn't go to a doctor. We would go to her and ask her, we need this, or what's wrong with this, and just the knowledge that she gave us at a young age stayed with me. She could also she painted these wonderful religious paintings, but she'd be painting them and wouldn't be looking at them. She would have a conversation, cigarette in one hand with a cup of coffee, and you're like, "What's that going to be?" And she'd go, "I don't know. I'm just painting. It's coming through me." So we were raised in that environment, that we would see the weird stuff all the time. So we had a lot of conversations dealing with UFOs, Sasquatch, Bigfoot, and I was in rural Midwest, and we would see stuff that couldn't be explained. So I became a firm believer in things like that at a very early age. I've seen stuff in the sky myself that can't be explained. I was in the Air Force, and we witnessed things. A buddy of mine at Warner Robins, Georgia, he was working on a SAC side at nighttime, and he's walking it down the flight line, and he turns his head, and there's a man walking next to him that came out of nowhere. And he looks down, and the guy's not touching the ground. And about that time, he's terrified, and he doesn't look again. And security police surrounded him. They came up in their vehicles and said, "Where'd the other guy go?" And so they took him in and questioned him for 6 hours. And he has no idea what he saw, but it was on a SAC base where we had nuclear bombers. So there's a lot of strange stuff out there.
Awesome. Well, tell us every single thing that you know. well, well, we've had Captain Air Force was Robert Salas. He's still in the Air Force, and he wrote a book about UFOs coming to his base and shutting down the silos. And this dude's still enlisted, so you would think he had to get permission to do that, I would think, or something. So those stories are always fascinating. And then another guy, John Vasquez, he's passed. There was a Fort Benning weird UFO incident. If you ever get a time to look that up, it gets really weird. He was a friend of mine, and basically all the troops started freaking out, and some kind of alien thing happened. They saw some kind of being. But I wonder, it sounded kind of like, I was wondering, like maybe they are doing LSD or something, like experiments, which that doesn't rule out you're having the experiences, but it's just a lot of weird stuff. Like they were crying for their mothers and weird stuff. But that was a strange story. So those stories are always fascinating when they happen on military bases and stuff like that. Definitely. And so what did they say about some of these experiences in the military? What does the commanding officer say anything about any of it?
Well, back then it was like you don't want to really say anything or you saw anything, especially if you're a pilot, because you risked your career. It's not as open as it is now. My mother was at Fort Sill, Oklahoma station in the 50s, and she told a story that they had seen something up in the sky, and the whole base was watching. Everybody's out watching it for like an hour, but the next day nobody would say a word about it. Like they didn't see anything. It was hushed up immediately. So back then, yeah, you didn't want to risk your career or be sent to the nut house for saying stuff. And I find it amazing that right now we just had NASA say they're studying UFOs and the Pentagon at the same time. So that's almost admitting something's out there. I've spoke to several astronauts who have said they've seen stuff. Because they get that asked all the time. They said, yeah, but they're not going to risk their careers and say anything. And if you go back to the old NASA tapes when we first went to the moon, there was moments on the tapes where you hear the guy say, "Did you see that?" But since then, they started doing a 3-second, 5-second delay. So they were cutting that out. But the very early recordings, you hear that they saw something and they're talking about it. But since then, that's all been censored.
Yeah, it's definitely been crazy with the UFO subject. And I jokingly, I don't really watch any news that much, but if you put Fox News UFOs in right now, you can see all them freak out. And that's a blast to watch. Like just seeing them freak out about UFOs, Fox News. They're already crazy. And now they're, UFOs. But, and that's one of my favorite UFO documentaries is Dan Aykroyd's. If you can find that on YouTube and watch it, it's really good. It's called Dan Aykroyd, the actor, UFOs Unplugged, and he's basically sitting with David Sarita smoking a cigar or cigarette or something, just talking about UFO stuff. But that's what with my experiences. I saw this stuff and then started interviewing people to try to find out about it. But books helped me a lot, and it helped to talk to other people. Like the UFO stuff's one thing, but then when you start to see like beings that are look like they're not from around here, that's a lot as well. Like one of my big ones that I tell people, me and a friend Brian in Georgia saw some small hooded beings that seemed thin with like cloaks on, standing around a black box. And we were both like, "Do you see that?" And he's like, "Yes." "Do you see that?" We both had to affirm that we saw this at the same time because it was so weird. And then a cat jumped and they vanished. So it's like it helps you to talk to other people about it, especially when the being stuff happens. And I don't think I've been abducted or anything. If I have, I don't remember a damn thing, and they've wiped me clean because I don't remember being thrown on a table or anything. But I've had some weird being stuff for sure. And it's just so it's weird. And then you see like was it Neil deGrasse Tyson, the scientist guy? Like he's very intelligent, and I like him for the most part. But sometimes he's like, some of them say, "Well, aliens have never come here," and they say weird stuff, and you're like, man, you don't think they've ever come here ever? That's just ridiculous. They like the John Kill Mothman stuff. They probably live here right under our noses in like an interdimensional realm or something weird on so many different levels.
Well, just in the realm of history, I'm always looking for little nuggets in the history. Like, in the newspapers from the 1800s, when they talk about a craft crashing on the ground and then burying the alien in a cemetery. And it's like a matter of fact article. It's not, back then, people didn't make up stuff, they didn't lie. And you even go back farther than that, and I found little nuggets in a tribal oral storytelling. I came across one doing research, and it was in the Hopi legends. And they were talking about one village fighting another, and they went there to attack them on a flying shield. And I'm like, back up here, flying shield. You just described a flying saucer, and it was in their oral storytelling that somebody had written down. So you go back to that, like little people. There's been little people stories in this country for thousands of years. I mean, the Cherokees talk about the little people and having caves up in Franklin County, North Carolina. Here in Florida, there's a police document at Lake Wales of a gnome being caught in the cage. And the police came and got it. And then these other gnomes showed up and started throwing oranges at the house. So the people said, "Bring it back." And they turned it loose. But this is on documentation for police records. So you go back, you see stuff like that. There's stuff going on that we don't realize. Mankind is pretty much stupid about the bigger world. There's a lot of things we don't understand and we don't realize. Maybe we're not supposed to know everything.
That's interesting about the gnome. If you remember a link or the name of that, like I know they call them certain cases, let me know. I would like to look that up. I know there's one. I hung out with Stacy Brown, and he's been on finding Bigfoot and stuff and does Bigfoot stuff. But he came and filmed me for a documentary once, but something happened technical, so they didn't use it. But there was a story about the Ocheesy wild man, and it was kind of a similar story like the gnome story, but something they caught a Bigfoot and put it in a cage, and something happened. But there was some kind of talk that it might have just been like a crazy dude that escaped with hair all over his body, but maybe it was one of those kind of weird stories. But they wanted me to tell that story, so I was like researching it and stuff. So definitely like weird Florida stories. That's for sure. I'll have to check that out. So when it comes to Bigfoot, I think there's something weird
Did you
paranormal
know?
about it. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I got this delay here. Sorry. You were talking about Bigfoot. There was a newspaper article in the 1800s along the St. Johns River. They discovered a burial ground of giant skeletons, and they were 8 and 9 feet tall, and they had a double row of teeth. And the guys were playing with the skulls, putting on their heads as helmets. And they wrote it up in the paper. And the Indians living in that area called them the tall men, and they knew about these people. these 9-foot giants, were very possibly it was an encampment of Sasquatch, but there was a burial ground. And unfortunately, even though they wrote about it in the paper, all the skeletons have disappeared, and there's not a single museum that'll admit they have one.
I've heard different stories like that for sure. And so, what do you think about Bigfoot? Do you think there's a paranormal element? I know there's some people think it's just physical only. Do you think there's some mojo to it? It seems like it to me. There's something that's just different.
It, it it's odd that we've never captured one and we've never killed one. And I know scientists who have hunting parties now trying to bag one because they know that's the only evidence anybody's going to believe. But they've got to have something going on. The fact that they can disappear and not be seen. Now, I have had 3 different individuals that I know tell me they've had personal encounters, and these are all respectable men. One of the gentlemen, when I owned a bar in Georgia, he was a 6'5" redneck, and he told a story about encountering one in Lake Lanier. They were bass fishing, and they heard a noise, and this thing was hanging on the back of the bass boat. It was slapping the motor out of the water. This man broke down and cried like a baby that night. I offered him $200 to take me back out there, and he said, no, there's no way he'd ever go back there. 1 week later, the Macon Telegraph and News came out with an article where there had been hundreds of sightings on the backside of Warner Robins Air Force Base and in that area, Lake Lanier, where hunters have seen not only adults, but young ones too. So it tied in, you had a lot of witnesses. So somebody's seeing some stuff, and there's definitely something out there.
Definitely. So, can you tell us the name of your bar in Georgia? I'm curious. So that walk in there and see you late at night.
No, I'm gonna hide out. I'm trying to block Georgia out of my memory. I opened up a bar across the highway from the main gate of the base, and we had it for 5 years. But that's kind of like, okay, that's a different person. That's where I started writing, actually, because it was so scary on that street. It was the place is obviously haunted. That street was the only place you could drink for like 50 years when that town was there. But if I give credit to the bar, I got to give credit to the town. I want to avoid that.
That's cool. I'm from Georgia, so I understand
stories, and I picked up the writing.
I understand about blocking Georgia out. I don't hate it or anything, but I've had some bad crap happen there. Cancer
there might be people I owe money to or something.
yeah. But there's a lot of my experiences happen there. I had some pretty damn weird ones there for sure. A lot, and I've had some here, but there was some weird stuff there for sure. And so, what about Coyote and Hairy Man? Is that Cherokee or is that I know there's a folklore tale like that where like Bigfoot's hanging out with Coyote. I forget which tribe it is, though. I'd have to look it up.
Coyote's more of the Southwest. Yeah, Coyote, I kind of borrowed him from the Southwest because I really love the idea, him being a shapeshifter. And Coyote, there's a lot of stories with Coyote that are humorous. He's a trickster. At times he's good, and other times he's causing trouble because that's just his nature. And if you know familiar with the real Coyote, they're like that. They're very intelligent, but they're mischievous. We had one at the Greenwood Cemetery where I worked for 8 years as a caretaker, and it was amazing. This thing was so smart, you couldn't catch it. If you tried to follow it, it would lay down so you couldn't find out where its den was. And it just knew. I mean, it was very intelligent. So I said, well, I've got to do a story with a coyote. And I'd come across an old legend about shapeshifters, about turning their skin inside out to transform, unlike the Lon Chaney werewolf. So I wanted to use that to just do the whole trickster stuff. And at Coyote Rage, I really wanted to go crazy and make it more like an oral story that I grew up with. I wanted to bring in a lot of the culture, a lot of the beliefs. So we got little people, we got the bone pickers, and it's all based on legend and fact and part of the culture.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the book, and it was cool how he's like seeking to bring back his kind and kind of like get rid of humans, right? Because they're, troublesome. So it's definitely good. Yeah, definitely. And Coyote, I've always had I've loved those stories, and I've had some native ladies. They made this shawl with him on it for me. That was pretty cool. They paint it. So I've always enjoyed those stories. And once I actually had a run-in with a coyote that's kind of a sad story. And I don't think I've ever told it before, but I've been thinking about it lately because it makes me sad. I came across one I was in this house renting from these like hunter dudes, and they had one in a cage because they had those dogs, that would, I guess they turn it loose or whatever. But it was in the backyard, and I came across the cage, and he was in there. And I had never been near a coyote in my life. I didn't know much about them. I was younger, and I felt bad and wanted to let it out, but I was afraid to, because I was, first off, I thought I'd get in trouble from them because they were pretty, like, mean hunter dudes from the South. And then I just felt bad. I always felt bad that I didn't let it out, but it was like near a shopping center. Like they had this little piece of land. So, I mean, I always hope it got away, but maybe it didn't. But I always felt bad. So I've always been trying to do stuff like when Christina sees those things where you help save coyotes. Like I try to do that all the time where they're, protect them somehow with some of the legislation and stuff to make up for it. But I've always liked those stories. And I mean, they're weird. They're really, really, I have a lot of the folklore books, and some of them are bizarre and funny. And, I like the trickster element, and that's a big thing in paranormal. That's got trickster written all over it, with some of these experiences. Does the trickster deity come up in any of your teachings and stuff that through your life that's come up? Like, is there a coyote or something similar? Or
Well, yeah, there's with the southeastern tribes, instead of coyote, you have rabbit, and a rabbit does the teachings. I mean, where he's getting in trouble and stuff, and you're learning from him by his mistakes. And it's like the coyote, you learn from his goof offs. There's a wonderful coyote story that I love telling. It's about coyote. He's being kind of lazy. He's looking for a free meal, and he came by the house of Beaver, and he asked Beaver if he could feed him. And Beaver said, "Yeah, as long as you don't question where the food come from." And Beaver invited him into the den, and Beaver called to the little thing of water in the floor, and Beaver's sons came up, and the dad Beaver killed all three of his sons and cooked them up, fed him to Coyote. And so Coyote's like, "Whoa, man, this guy killed his own sons." And about a week later, Coyote was in the same area, and he was hungry again, looking for a free meal because he's kind of lazy. And he went in there and saw Beaver, and Beaver said, "Sure, I'll feed you." And Coyote watched, and Beaver called his sons up again. They were the same sons, hit him on the head and cooked him up. Coyote's like, "Wait a minute, we just ate these guys last week. What's going on here?" So Coyote said he was going to leave, and he snuck around and hid in the bushes. And he watched, and he saw Beaver gather up the skins and the bones that were left, and he threw them in the water and said a prayer, and his sons come back to life, and the little beavers come back out. And so Coyote's like, "Wow, that's some great magic. I'm going to do that." And so Coyote went home and invited some friends over for dinner, and he did that to his three sons. And he killed them and ate them and served them, and he went to the water because he had memorized the words. But Coyote hadn't paid attention. He didn't know that Beaver kept the bones and skin of each animal separate. Coyote put them all together in one bundle and threw them in the water. So when sons came back, some had 2 legs, some had 4 legs, one had 2 heads. And so he made this terrible mistake. And the moral of this oral storytelling that we told the kids is you don't mess around with stuff you don't understand, especially magic.
definitely. Right. That's a good one. Definitely eerie for sure. I like it. I like it a lot. And the coyote, coyote rage. There's so many different elements. Is that something that you're going to continue later doing? Like, is there going to be more anything attached to that in the future?
I am going to continue it because the characters are so much fun. Not only is Coyote a great character, even though he's inherently evil, but Raven and Mouse, that combination there, I just got to continue with their story. So yeah, there are sequels, but the second 2 books are going to be a lot harder than the first one because you got the big battle elements, and you got the different tribes of animals aligning on whether they're going to be on Coyote's side or on Raven's side. So it's going to take a lot of, it's like Lord of the Rings Native American style. So there's going to be a lot of elements. That's why I haven't done it yet. But yeah, it's in my head right now thinking about it. I'm currently working on a bunch of short stories I promised to do and another comic book. But yeah, I want to get back to Coyote Rage and continue his story.
Definitely, definitely. And I know you've won the Bram Stoker Award, 3 times? We just had his relative on, Dacre Stoker. That was really cool. What were the books that won those?
Crota won the Bram Stoker Award for Best First Novel. It was also a Stoker nominee for Best Novel of the Year. It was up against Stephen King's The Green Mile. And then Coyote Rage won for Best Novel of the Year. And then the third one is kind of a Bram Stoker's kind of, it's what they call a Lifetime Achievement Award. It's actually a Stoker for your everything you've done over your lifetime. So that's kind of
Cool.
the highest award you can get from the HWA.
Nice. That's really cool. So, who were some of the authors that you grew up with when you were younger that got you into writing?
Well, of course, we all, a lot of us started with Edgar Allan Poe. I mean, Poe and Lovecraft. I love Ray Bradbury. I mean, he was an amazing wordsmith. I can never write like him. Also, Andre Norton did a lot of fantasy and science fiction, so I read a lot of her stuff. And Edgar Rice Burroughs, the John Carter Mars series, the Tarzan series at the Earth Core. I was also hugely influenced by Famous Monsters of Filmland, the magazine. When I was 9 years old, my mother gave me my very first allowance. It was 50 cents, and the closest town we lived to was like 20 miles away. Had a population of 1,200. There was nothing in there, no department stores, but they had a Rexall drugstore and a magazine rack. And I walked in, and there was a magazine covered with images of werewolves. I said, "Oh, I've got to have it." It was 50 cents. That started my lifelong love with monsters and all things scary. Buying that magazine.
Cool. And we've had shows about Forrest Ackerman. There was some paranormal documentary about him that some weird ghost stuff happened after he died, and there was like a documentary about it on Sci-Fi or something. We had a show about him, but he's the guy that designed that magazine and everything. And something happened weird where he passed away, and then he was like doing tricks still from, and they were weird, like weird ink would show up and weird stuff, and uh, it was pretty interesting for sure. And I know that you had known Scott Marlowe and cryptozoology, and he had been on the show in the past, and I know you were friends with him, and he's passed. God rest his soul. And I know you said something about doing like a cryptid panel with him or something like that. That's you've been into cryptids.
Yeah, I did several with him. I did some at Spooky Empire and at their convention, and I also did at Phantasm. I was actually, I think I was the first person to invite Scott to Spooky Empire. He was a wealth of knowledge, and I just wanted to get up there and play 20 questions with him so I could hear some of his stories. But every year we would do the cryptid panel. I'd get Scott, I'd get Mark Muncy from Erie, Florida, and we just get up there and have a blast. I mean, we do an hour panel and didn't want to stop talking. He has some great stories. So yeah, it was a pleasure. I mean, Scott Marlowe is a great guy. I mean, I miss him. His presence is going to be missed in the conventions because we learned so much from the man.
Yes, he sent me some of his books, and he signed them and everything, and we had him on. And there's been a lot of greats from the fields. Another guy, Scott Martis, he passed. This dude would get in his boat and hunt down sea monsters. He's been on the show, but yeah, I remember Scott. I've had Scott on the show, and I believe I written interviewed him before, and he sent me some of his books. But definitely, do you remember any of the cryptids? Were they in Florida specifically, or just everywhere?
Well, his Sasquatch sightings, his Bigfoot sightings. I asked him the last time I talked to him. I said, "Well, where exactly did you see this?" I mean, Ocala National Forest. He said, "No." He said, "I saw it right there where Winter Park, Florida exists, right along in that area, Castleberry. It was where 436 is." He said, "Back in the day, that was all forested, all before Disney, there wasn't anything there." So he saw the creature there. Now he also researched the Lake Wales water monster out of Lake Clinch. He called me one time because I was at Greenwood Cemetery on the caretaker. He said, "Do you have a certain person buried there?" And we went and looked and said, "Yeah, there was. It was the guy who died in 1926." Well, the legend was he went down to this lake to fish, and he didn't come home. And they found him the next day with his face bit off. They couldn't identify the bite marks. And the rumors and the local legends was there was a water monster in that lake. And I think Scott even did an article about it for Mysteries Magazine.
Wow, that's definitely interesting. And do you look to cryptids a lot for when you write your books and research them? Because I mean, it seems is there other books that have embraced different cryptids on some level?
Well, when I wrote Crota, my first novel, Crota is about a prehistoric creature the size of a grizzly that loves to kill and hunt for pleasure, because mankind's the only creature on the planet that hunts for sports. I said, what if you had a creature this big that did this? I wanted to make it believable, so I surrounded it with folklore and Indian legends and cryptids and all this stuff to make it more believable. And I guess it worked, because I've actually had people come up to me at a powwow and say they saw the Crota walking around the Ocala National Forest. Unfortunately, a lot of everybody who reviewed it said it's an Indian legend. It's not. It's something I invented. So one of the largest gaming companies in the world come out with a game extension called the Crota's Lair, and it's about a creature living in an underground labyrinth on the moon. My book's about a creature in an underground labyrinth on this world. So I'm sure they were inspired by my stuff and figured it was public domain because it was Indian legend, not realizing it was something I had invented entirely myself.
And I know it says in your bio, and you've said this, that you would go, you lectured throughout the country on customs and folklore of American Indians. What kind of gig was that, or was it always related to your books?
No, no. I just, even before I did the books, I looked around, and the native culture at the time, there was hardly anybody doing the teaching, and non-native society was ignorant of the culture. That's always been the case. There's always fear and misunderstanding because you don't know anything about it. I said, well, and what they were teaching in schools wasn't accurate. So I started lecturing for free in grade schools and high schools and public schools and Boy Scout camps and YMCA, just so somebody could go out there and put the stories out there. The kids are very receptive because nobody had bothered to do that. Of course, I used to upset the teachers, and especially in grade schools. I'd walk in, and a lot of times in November was a big month for studying Indians. And I'd go in here and say, well, I know you're studying American Indians in class, but I'm here to tell you what you're learning is wrong. I'm going to tell you the truth. So I did it just for the love of doing it. And I did that long before I ever published the stories. At the time, I was still writing martial arts articles. I was just getting into fiction. But I figured, I never charged a single school. I would never charge a grade school or a child because, the knowledge was given to me, and I've got to give it, I got to pass it on.
That's very cool for sure. And when it comes to writing a book, did it take you a while to do your first book? I wrote some in the past, and I haven't wrote any in years. And so they seem like a real big pain in the butt. And my biggest weakness has always been editing. But for you personally, did it take you a while to finally get that first book published? And what were some of the ordeals?
Well, luckily, when the first novel, I already had an agent because I had sold 2 children's books. I did a short story, and a friend of mine sent it to another publisher, and they liked the short story, so they asked what I had. So I sold a couple children's books to an educational publisher, and that led to me getting an agent for the novel. Now, Crota being the first novel, I think he probably submitted it to every publishing house possible. And when it finally did get purchased, it was bought by Donald I. Fine Incorporated. Now, this was bought at the time that Donald I. Fine, the book company, was being bought by a larger company, and Donald I. Fine, the publisher, the man running it, was dying of cancer. And so I had an editor who quit to become a real estate agent. So it's pretty well, the book was orphaned before it ever began. So I was lucky it even came out there. And it came out with, a terrible cover and a very little fanfare, but it got really good reviews. So you never know, but it was all the work of the agent. He got it out there, and he never gave up on me.
Very cool for sure. Were you always good with editing, or did you have trouble with that? I always had trouble with it, like an idiot.
I always have trouble. I got books sitting here about, editing and adjectives and adverbs. I hate this stuff. I'm the worst grammar person in the world. I do have, writers got to have a good editor. And I've always had great editors. I mean, that's important. I mean, they're going to catch the stuff, the mistakes. I do a ton of rewrites until I can't find anything else myself wrong with it. And I'll send it off to them, and they'll tell me what's wrong. With the bigger publishers, they'd always send, the changes they'd want. I get mad and throw the changes across the room and stalk out of the office and be mad for 3 days and come back in and pick them up and say, yeah, they're right. This will make the story stronger.
What kind of screenplays have you worked on? Are you still working on some of those? Is there any that came to fruition?
I get the worst luck in that. No, I've done stuff for, I did some short subjects that have been made. I've done some PSAs. I came really close a couple times. I had a screenplay based on my novel Evil Whispers. and I had George Romero wanting to do it. George has been loving my stuff for a long time. He wanted to do Crota, but didn't have deep enough pockets. So we pitched the screenplay and the novel to a film company. It took 5 months to set up a conference call with George and the producer from the film company, my agents, and it was in California. And in 5 months, the producer hadn't read the script. I have George A. Romero online, the guy, Night of the Living Dead, who will do the movie for $5 million. I said, hey, you're going to make your money back in just DVD rentals out of the machines. So the guy was like, well, let me tell you what. He goes, I'll go home and read over the weekend, call you on Monday. And he never called on Monday. He called on Tuesday, he said, I need another week. Well, during that week, the writer's strike hit out in Hollywood. I couldn't talk to anybody. I couldn't talk to George. George's Diary of the Dead came out, was snapped up by the Weinstein brothers, and they wanted a sequel. So it killed my deal, all because that's what happens in Hollywood. I have the worst luck. I had another one based on my novel Breed. We were starting to start filming it, and they had contacted me, said they'll start filming the following year, and it was set in the St. Augustine. They said they could shoot in Puerto Rico because that's where they had some money backers. Well, the hurricane tore up Puerto Rico, so that killed that deal.
Man, and I know
worst luck ever.
What about I came across that Jericonda Joe, and I had no idea you were involved with that. I just seen on Bloody Disgusting, and I started reading. I was like, Al Goingback, I know him. And then what was the deal with that? Was that another one that kind of fell through the cracks?
That was a student film that they did at Valencia. Romero wrote the screenplay for it. I actually got sent down to audition for the part of the Seminole Indian. I was like, oh, this is George's stuff, And I was kind of worried because I left him a note because it was the Seminole Indian. The story had killed a Florida panther illegally. And this was right about the time that James Billy had just gotten in trouble for killing a Florida panther. I'm like, George, you might want to change this a little bit. You don't want the chief of the Miccosukis coming after you. He's got money. I mean, but yeah, it was like, it was kind of neat to audition for it. And then we didn't see it for years. We just saw it recently online, see the part of it. But they never finished it. It was part student film, but George wanted to expand it out. It never happened.
What did you think of it? I was like, this is cool, but I wanted more and felt I liked it, but a little disappointed. I was like, where's Bigfoot? I mean, I saw the video, the student thing.
Yeah, they had just gotten basically the live audience TV show thing. We're just getting into the woods with the Sasquatch. I think Rick Gonzalez did the special effects makeup on it. I think he still got the head of the creature. But yeah, they were supposed to come back and finish it, but it never happened. And I heard that there are rumors that George has several movies like that that have been buried away. So hopefully, all this stuff is archived now at, I think, the University of Pittsburgh. So hopefully they'll start bringing some of this out for us to see.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it and everything, but it left you wanting more. And then when you saw all the sketches of Bigfoot, it made you want a lot more because the sketches look really awesome. What I saw, the pictures and everything, and that was weird. Is that Jericonda place really in Florida?
They filmed somewhere in Florida. I'm not sure where they filmed at. Part of it was like on the backside of the college, but I think the little where they had the festival was somewhere down south a little bit.
But I think that was a fictional name. I don't think it was a real place. I just wonder. But yeah, it was interesting for sure. And then I saw you involved, and it's like, that's cool though. You got lots of George Romero stories. That's pretty awesome for sure. What did you talk? You talked to him on the phone, voice.
George was a sweetheart. I wanted to work with him. I've talked with him. I've hung out with him at conventions. The first time I talked to him, he contacted my agent, and it was the first conference call with him because he was interested in doing Crota. And every time I saw him at a convention, he would ask about Crota and if I had still had the rights to it. And I'm like, yeah, George, I'm saving it for you. And I was saying, because he wanted to do it, and I thought he could really do it justice because he wanted to do it traditional. He didn't want to do it CGI. So broke my heart when he finally passed away because I was still dreaming of us working together. I just wanted to be in the corner and watch the man do his thing.
Yeah, it was definitely a great, and that's cool. At least you got some cool stories and got to meet him. So that's good for sure. And so when it comes to, I guess, some of the lectures in Native history, I don't know. I know there's a lot to talk about with it. What are some memorable things that you usually spoke about to set people straight, like with the history and things like that? And I know there's a lot, but maybe if you could just go over something.
Well, I was what some of the things I was criticized the artwork done in children's books or school books. They're never accurate. They never picked a tribe. There was always the stereotypical Plains Indian with the teepee, and we're talking
Mm-hmm.
about the Pilgrims Landing. I'm like, no, they didn't have teepees. I mean, that's a tent for a tribe chasing the buffalo. I mean, the Indians on the east coast of America lived in houses. They had wooden shelters. They didn't
Mm-hmm.
have to move around. They were farmers. They fished. They hunted. I mean, the Cherokees didn't have teepees. So I would tell these people that I said, this is you're thinking basically you're showing something that looks very primitive, and the kids didn't understand. They was cities when the white man arrived here. I mean, the smallpox and other disease wiped out a lot of the Indians. But I used to point out to the kids, I said, pick up a map and look at the names on the map. I said, all those Indian names were usually places where they lived. I mean, I got maps from the 1700s and the 1800s of St. John's River showing all the tribes where they're located along the river. And people don't realize that. In Florida, they think about the Seminole Indians, and that's all you think about. They don't teach about all the tribes who were here before the Seminoles. I mean, there was dozens of tribes throughout the entire state. And when the Spanish came, not only did the disease affect them, the Spaniards wiped them out. I mean, they
Mm-hmm.
enslaved them and took them to the islands to work in the sugar field. When the Spanish finally left Florida, they took about 80 Indians with them. That was all that was left. I mean, there's actually written accounts and diaries of Spanish priests about traveling with the conquistadors and how they would travel with a large pack of dogs. Well, they didn't have dog food, and they would feed Indian women and children to dogs for food. I mean,
Uh,
these are barbarians. They're looking for gold. And when they left, when the Spanish finally gave up Florida and left, they left their cattle, they left their livestock here. So the Seminoles were, basically the Creek Indians up in Georgia, looking at Florida. They were having problems up there with the white people. They're looking at Florida, this wide open area with these herds of cattle. So they come down and took over and established in Florida. And of course, after they got established, the white people started looking at the Seminoles like, what's these Indians got the state to themselves with the cattle? So they come down and took that from them. But people don't understand the history of Florida. It's so it's so varied and diversified, and there's so much to it. Uh, People like when you hear Key West all the time, they say, "Oh, that's the westernmost island of the Keys." No, it's not. It's the name's based on Key Wesso, which is Spanish for Bone Island. Because when the first people arrived in Key West, it was covered with skeletons. It was a burial ground. So you hear all these weird tales from Key West. Well, that's why the whole island was a burial ground. But this stuff is not taught in schools. I mean, they don't teach you that. In Miami, it was common practice back when Miami was first being established. A lot of burial grounds there, native burial grounds, and they would give the skulls away for souvenir or sell them to people coming down to the tourists. They were a nice tourist item. This was common back then. But none of that's in the history books. I tell kids, I said, you need to really understand the entire state or the entire country. I mean, history, it shouldn't be covered over. We may not like what we hear in history, but we should understand it. We should know it. That way, the mistakes and the bad things won't get repeated.
Definitely, for sure. And I'd never heard some of those stories, and I'm always wanting to learn about all that. We have a lot on about shamanism and stuff, and that's some things that's helped me when I was going through a hard time with all the cancer and my dad's death. And so I try to get on a lot of different people about that subject. And it's just something healing about it. But these stories, learning the truth, is definitely fascinating. Have you ever wrote anything about the history of any of this stuff, like in a book in written form?
I put them in my stories. I consider myself more of a oral storyteller than a writer. I try to write the same way the elders, my ancestors used to teach the kids. They didn't give them books. They would share a story, and the lesson was in the story. And the story entertained, and you got the lesson, and without realizing you got it. It was like putting candy coating a medicine and giving it to a child, and you just throw it out there. If I write nonfiction books, a lot of people are not going to pick up a nonfiction book. You're going to, oh, I don't want to be educated. This can be boring. But if I put a little tidbit in there, a little story, a little truth in the story, and you're enjoying the story, and I've got some monster chasing people all over the place, and there's blood and mayhem and just a lot of gore, they're being entertained and they're being educated whether they like it or not. They're not realizing they're learning something too. So I'm more of a storyteller than a writer, and I've always been that way.
Definitely, and you can definitely see it in the books. Let me see. I think I've read like four of your books. There's a few a couple I need to dig for on eBay and get that I missed. And didn't you do some? I saw something. You do comics too. Didn't you do some Batman thing at some point? I saw you talking about that.
Well,
Or
I was one of eight writers selected for the DC Writers Workshop. It was a 13-week course. I think it was 2016. I was picked, and we spent 13 weeks online, learning the comics. At the end, I wrote a comic for them. I actually wrote a Poison Ivy comic for them, and they were like, "Why pick a villain?" I said, "Well, guys, Poison Ivy to me is not a villain. I mean, she's a person who likes plants better than she likes people. And I know a lot of women like that. I mean, I said in my culture, she would be a medicine woman. Now, I just got contacted yesterday to do another comic for another company. It was in DC. So I've got 3 stories I'm bouncing around. I'm hoping I can have time to do a story for them too. Comics are a lot of fun, but the formatting takes a lot of time and thought. It's not like a free flow short story where I can just sit here with my eyes closed in front of the computer. But yeah, comics are a whole new thing for me. I read them as a kid, put them aside, but yeah, I love doing them.
cool. And is there particular titles that you read in comics that you keep up with?
Not so much. I like the scary stuff. I was never a superhero kind of guy because they just, to me, they were, I believed in Bigfoot and werewolves and Dracula, but I never believed in superheroes for some reason as a kid. They just had too many powers. But I love the scary comics. I grew up on the Weird War and the Werewolf by Night, Tomb of Dracula, Living Mummy. So any kind of those the old EC type comics, Vampirella, Creepy Eerie. I love the scary comics.
There's one I know, Stephen Graham Jones. I've only read one book of his, Only Good Indians, and it was pretty good. I enjoyed it. But there's a comic he has coming up, and you might want to look into it. I don't think it's out yet, but it's called Earth Divers. And I'll read just a little clip from it. Earth Divers unites 4 indigenous survivors in an apocalyptic near future as they embark on a bloody one-way mission to save the world by traveling back in time to kill Christopher Columbus and prevent the creation of America. So that sounds pretty cool. It's called
Nice.
Earth Divers. I'll send you the
It
link.
does.
I was like, I got to check that out. That's pretty trippy for sure. And so you've done the Poison Ivy comic, but there's some other ones. Can you mention anything else that you're doing, or is that you can't mention it yet?
Uh, can't talk about it until they're out. Yeah. Yeah, I don't want to. I'm very superstitious. I don't like to talk about a project until I've been paid and it's published. Otherwise, when you talk about it, it never happens.
Yes, I understand. So when it comes to, I know I shared a picture of you that you were at a powwow. Do you usually get out and dress up and do the ceremonies and stuff?
I do. I don't dance as much as I used to. I think that photo was from a veterans dance at the Mount Dora powwow. Now my sons do the full regalia. They made their own stuff. They're beautiful. They're fancy dancers. They still got the energy. I'm getting old. I'll do one dance at a powwow now and call it a day. But yeah, I do dress up, not as much as I used to back when I was 30, because I've been doing this a long time.
Yeah, I tried to use some of your other pictures, but it kept scalping you, and I was like, size. So that one finally worked. I was like, oh, use that one. Like,
Yeah.
like that WordPress. It's like it's terrible if you don't do the right size. It's a mess. But I like that one a lot. And when it comes to these ceremonies and stuff, I mean, is that I hear from a lot of different people that it's something to do with sky people and things like that. Is there any kind of element like that into it of like alien kind of stuff with some of the dances?
Well, Well, I have heard, I've researched, and there are several tribes that'll tell you that they came from the Seven Sisters, from the Pleiades. They traced their ancestors that way. So it does appear in some of the folklore and some of the legends. Like I said, the Hopi had the story about the flying shield. Uh, they also talk about coming up from the underground through a Sipapuni. that this level here, we're on the fourth level, and there's three levels below us, and they came up from underground. The Apaches talk about spending time back in the day with the ant people. So yeah, it does come into it. I did see a report one time that the Choctaw. Now I've been trying to find this again. I haven't been able to find it. But they would go up to Cahokia, to the mounds there, just on the east side of the Mississippi River, there at St. Louis, and do a ceremony to the sky people. And which is interesting because a lot of the mounds and stuff that are in America, when the white man first came here, they would ask the Indians living in the area who built the mounds, and their reply was, we don't know. They were here when we got here, and so it has that whole tie-in a little bit. So yeah, there are things a little bit in the oral stories, a little bit's been handed down. Of course, the pictographs out west, some of them look like they're aliens. So you never know. I mean, I see certain tribes in Central America, South America, and even here, where they misshaped the head of the children, and made them the flatheads and stuff. And I always wondered, like, why would you do that unless you saw somebody who looked like that, somebody that you really respected and praised, then you wanted your kids to look like those, that they were the higher level. I've always wondered about the whole misshaping of the skulls down in Peru and different places like that.
Yeah, those get pretty weird when you see them. I mean, they try to explain it away with something, but it's like that's pretty weird looking. I mean, maybe they are doing the weird whatever they did to do that, but it's still weird. Like there's different things with it. I know one of the subjects that I enjoy to talk about, but it's probably there's not many subjects with this that really scare me. There's a few, but not a lot. The S Walker, and I'll say S Skinwalker. I don't even like to say it, so I say S Walker. But and another one's that H. Holmes guy. He gives me the creeps. That Chicago killer guy that trapped you in the house, the hotel, and cyanide you. That dude's I've had his living relative on the show, Jeff Budget, so that gets real creepy. But is that anything that comes up in the lore down here with the S Walker situation? Or does it come up in your books, or you thought about it?
I kind of briefly touched upon that when I did Coyote Rage with the Skinwalker. I mean, Skinwalkers. I mean, now the folklore is they're more like creatures, but with the original stories, like the Navajo and stuff, they were more like witches who could change your skin and shapeshift, and they weren't friendly. I mean, they were something to be feared were these people. So yeah, there are still people who firm believe in skinwalkers. I mean, they're as far as I know, they might exist. I don't know. I've never seen one. I haven't not seen one. I mean, I'm not going to doubt when some of these people are very serious about telling me these things. That's like the stories of the little people. I got friends who go to the Sundance out in South Dakota, North Dakota area every year, and they said that they're firm believers of this valley out there, and it's known as the Valley of the Little People. And they told me a story that they had camped there one time before the Sundance, and the one guy had woke up because his tent was being shaken, and he unzipped his tent and he couldn't see anything, but he said he could see his friend's tent, and it looked like something was grabbing the fabric and climbing up. And he swore this would be a true story. And he said the people live in that area won't go in that area because they're fearful of what's down in that valley. So, the fact that these are, in remote areas, skinwalkers happen in remote areas. Now you got shows like Skinwalker Ranch where people are saying they're seeing stuff. But you never know. I mean, you're talking, there's werewolf stories in America now that we didn't have before. So there's could be a lot of things out there we don't know. I mean, some people believe in ghosts, some people don't. Are they believe because they're real? Are the other people not believing because they just never seen one?
And you have Dogman, all that's gotten pretty weird with the Dogman stuff. I've seen weird stuff about that. A photo that supposedly was taken recently outside a zoo, but they didn't know if it was real or not. There's a lot of stuff like that. And I saw something on YouTube that was questionable. There was no evidence, but a guy saying they found a body and there's police and paramedics on some Dogman channel, which I don't know what that was, but there's a lot of weird stuff. You just never know. And Dogman could be werewolf. I mean, it's kind of similar. We've had Linda Godfrey on, and she's knee deep in that stuff, like serious researcher, Beast of Bray Road, and all that stuff. And yeah, Secret of Skinwalker Ranch. I've read the book by George Knapp and a column something, The Hunt for the Skinwalker. And then recently there was a sequel to that book, Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, where it just came out. It's a sequel to the first book. And these military personnel claim that they went out to Skinwalker Ranch and came home, and phenomenon followed them, and their children felt like their children were in danger and weird stuff like that. So that's pretty interesting. But yeah, that Secret of Skinwalker show gets pretty crazy. First, you don't know what to think of it, but you know the history, and then you got people getting radiation burns and almost dying, and it's like someone going to die in this show. And then the dumbest thing is they named the computer Satan there. It's like, was that a good idea? I don't know if that was a good idea. Like, did you really name your computer Satan at Skinwalker Ranch? It's like John Carpenter movie, Prince of Darkness or something. But there's just so many fascinating things with it. So when it comes to paranormal, have you seen any being type stuff, like something like an apparition or a being?
I have seen apparitions, ghost, when I worked for Greenwood Cemetery as a caretaker. That was common seeing stuff. I mean, even in the daytime, one of the craziest things happened. I was taking a break and I was in the old section, in section A. And I'm sitting on a John Deere Gator and I'm reading a copy of Fangoria magazine of all things. And I look up and I see this man walking straight towards me, and he is really angry. And he's like, I just jumped, this guy's coming right at me, and he disappears right in front of me. I'm like, okay, I didn't think I was parked on the grave, but I'm going to move this cart just to be sure. But yeah, you see stuff like that at Greenwood, probably the most haunted spot in the Orlando area. The cemetery was originally opened in 1880. The city of Orlando took it over in 1890. And when they made it the official city cemetery, they closed all the other burial grounds in the city. They moved the bodies there. But there's not headstones for the bodies they moved. They're all unmarked. So you've got that. You've got people who were lynched during the Ocoee riots are buried there. You got people who died in Sunland Mental Institution are buried there, but only the children have markers, the adults don't. You got all this crazy energy at the place, and you got people coming out here stirring it up all the time. But yeah, I have seen several times, and I had a lot of experiences up in St. Augustine. My book, Breed, is set in St. Augustine. And I basically wrote the books. I went up to St. Augustine one night, and I was messing around. I was at the Talamato Cemetery, which is the old Catholic cemetery. And it's built on the site where an Indian village was, where the village of Saloy was. And I went to the backside where nobody goes. I stuck a 35 millimeter camera into the fence and took a couple pictures. Well, when I developed this picture, there's a green beam of light coming down, hitting this above ground crypt, a small crypt. And there's no reason for the light because they had no lights in the cemetery at the time. And standing in this beam of light is a woman. You can see her, but you can see through her. She's facing the crypt, but her eyes are looking right at me. And her face looks like a corpse. You can see her and you see through her, and she's holding what looks like flowers in her hand. And she looks very upset that I'm taking her picture. So I was kind of blown away, and I had never heard any stories of St. Augustine, so I started researching it. And people said, yeah, the story is they call her the bride. And she died a week before her wedding. And they buried her in a bridal costume, and she's been seen by quite a few people. But I started researching for Breed and the stories, and I have sat down with a former chief of police, with city officials, and with a lot of high-ranking people in St. Augustine, and they all have ghost stories. And they're all very much believers in the spirit world and ghosts of St. Augustine.
I'm not sure where that music came from. I heard something. It sounded like a Britney Spears or something. I don't know.
No, it was
Yeah,
it
I
was
know.
it was my friend's ringtone.
Oh, okay, okay. I was just like, what the hell is that? Wham's up there with a lot of
It's
tribes.
aliens.
I know. Wham's up there with a lot of tribes. What tribes you are up there? Yeah.
Well, the nations that I have been um, the nations that I have been connecting with are the Haudenosaunee, mostly Seneca and Mohawk, and and um, the Munsee Esopus of the Hudson Valley. I guess they're more broadly called Lenape. A lot of them don't refer to themselves as Lenape because they see Lenape as a language family, a part of the Algonquin language family, and it's too general. But at least the people that I know, and some Mohicans. I have a Mohican elder who is a pretty good friend of mine, um, and some Abenaki that are further north, and then one of my teachers is Micmac. So it's more northeast, um, up into Canada. Um, and they have a lot of stories that are similar in some ways to what Al has been talking about, although they're also different in some other ways. They do have stories of the mounds actually, and stories of where the mounds came from, and they insist that the specific mounds, like the mound complexes in the Hudson Valley specifically, and some of those in Virginia, if you go down into the mid-Atlantic states, that they know precisely who made those, and they did, in different waves of people. But that doesn't count all the other mounds in all other places. Obviously, I
Hmm.
mean, if you look at Gregory Little's Encyclopedia of Mounds in North America, I don't know, there were like 66,000 sites or something at one point, so, and all different types, so it just, yeah, I mean, the Muncie in the Hudson Valley, the mid Hudson Valley, at least I think on the eastern side of the river, but but certainly on the western side of the river, like on Overlook Mountain, which is the mountain that's right, sort of the backdrop of Woodstock, the actual town of Woodstock. Some of those structures are actually pretty recent, and they were some of the petroforms were made right before contact with white people, which would have been in the early 17th century, early 1600s. So, so the people that have survived there, that are still there, they have a pretty good sense of what those were, what they were for. They don't always, they don't always share the lore with white folks because white folks haven't been very good to them. So, you know what I mean? It's like this is secret stuff in a way. But there are certainly a lot of stories that would lend themselves to storytelling on a wider basis. There's a book that's called um, Iroquois Supernatural, which is a collection of stories, scary stories.
I've interviewed them.
But yeah, but scary story. I think that they were up. I think I was with you, and
Okay,
I think
cool,
we
cool.
did the show
It's
together.
a good one
Yeah,
for
yeah,
sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's got a lot of scary stories in it. So a lot of monsters, but these are stories that have been agreed upon that they can be shared, sort of generally, and they're not stories that a lot of people know, but there are stories about the flying heads and the good and bad little people, and curses and water manitus and horned serpents. There's a lot of horned serpent stuff, um, and and then further north, they don't really talk about the Wendigo. The Haudenosaunee don't, because that they have different beings that they talk about. But certainly, if you go up further into Micmac country, Penobscot country, up into Maine and into Canada, up into where the Cree are, and then into the west to the Ojibwe, they'll start talking about the Wendigo or the Chenu, as the Micmac refer to him, with them, I should say, that spirit, because it's understood as being more of a spirit than a being. I think that we get our sense of it being a being from that famous story that was written by Algernon Blackwood, or whatever his name is, that you can get.
That's him.
Yeah, and he's the one that sort of created that image, and he did use native, indigenous lore for that, but he also kind of gave the impression that a Wendigo is always like an embodied being. And if you read the Cree stories about Wendigo can be far more elusive than that. Wendigo can be a spirit, it can be a mood, it can be a trend, it can be something that strangely possesses a person or an animal or a place at a certain point and then moves around. It's almost like this weird um, It's like a pathogen almost. And there's a wonderful collection of
Hmm.
Wendigo stories from the Cree that's called, the collection is called Where the Chill Comes From. That's the name of the book. And you get to see all the different ways in which the Cree talk about Wendigo. And it's actually, the way they talk about Wendigo is creepier than the story Algernon talked about. Uh, I mean, I got a copy of that book. It's not easy to get. I got a copy of it, and I read about half the stories. I just had to put the book down because it was just kind of like, oh God, I feel like I sort of know what this is. I know what this feels like. You know, um, and it follows people around. It follows people around when they are greedy or when they are too afraid or when they are desperate. It sort of follows those those feelings that people have when they let their guard down, and they
It's
what.
creepy.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's very creepy.
Clarice turns you into Hannibal Lecter.
Well, sort of. Yeah, sort of. But I think it's also a way of just expressing, some of the realities that people who live very close to the land and sometimes in very harsh circumstances, how they learn how to live together and sort of cope with things that are physically and psychologically difficult from time to time, and having these relationships with the natural world. It's just interesting. But I think that there's a lot of fodder for stories. I mean, I've thought of a lot of stories, but I haven't decided for myself whether I'm really comfortable using native materials to write some of these stories, because I mean, I do have indigenous stuff in my background, but I don't like come out and say I'm indigenous, because do I look it? No, and I didn't grow up with it, so I don't feel like I can really sort of tell stories in that idiom. But um, there's certainly a lot of really fascinating ways of understanding human evil and suffering and heroism and what love means, and there's just they're great stories. You know, they're great stories.
I've heard it called Watiko or something, like some book was called that,
Yeah, yeah,
Wetiko or something.
it's Wetiko. Wetiko is how you say
Watiko.
that. Wetiko. Yeah, there are like four main Cree dialects, and so depending on sort of which dialect you're using, how you pronounce it is a little bit different. But then there's another book that's called it's a book that was done by the Anishinaabe and the Ojibwe, and it's called the Mishomis book, and it's kind of like a creation book. I mean, it's for anybody, but it's written like a kid's book, and it's probably the best introduction to Ojibwe cosmology, even just kind of Algonquin cosmology that I've ever read. But it's got some really interesting ways of understanding, how what we call evil came into the world. And it's got a very specific story about Bigfoot, who Bigfoot is, where Bigfoot comes from, what the purpose of Bigfoot is in the world. It's it's. I mean, I think these. I think I agree with Al. I think these stories should be known. This stuff should be known, not only because it's part of the history of where we're sitting. I mean, obviously, but they're just great stories. They're stories that have they certainly have changed my life. Listening to these stories. Um,
Definitely, definitely, and I've always had an admiration for the culture. And I've had some strange things come up. Like, I can remember younger days a mushroom situation. Not to go into too much detail with that, but I saw some native ghosts, and it was like standing in my room, and they were dressed in full attire. Now, it seemed like they were ghosts. I don't know if it was just my imagination, but it seemed like I really saw them with my eyes, and I freaked out and ran out of the house. And my dad, who's passed now, he never drunk booze. He never did drugs, never did anything. He claimed he saw a chief ghost around the house in Georgia. And so I know there's some Cherokee stuff, but like I said, the DNA stuff's so weird. I did see a picture of my great grandmother, and she was like, "Wow, she looks like for sure." She had dark skin, and look, their clothes even look uh, native. But and there's another thing that's happened that I've talked about before that's weird. I would have a dream of like it looked like a western or movie or something, but it was a preacher hanging a native, and I would wake up and sometimes have a crick in my neck. And I was always like, well, I hope I was a native in a past life and not the a-hole preacher. Like, I don't know what it was, but there's always been weird stuff, dreams and things. And I don't know what any of it means, but I love the knowledge. There's just something powerful to it. It's of the earth. That's why I like the shaman topic. It's helped me, deal with things. And when you do shows like this, and shows like, with the shaman topic, I feel like it raises consciousness and helps. So that's why I like it. And that's why I enjoy it. There's just something powerful to it that feels good and feels right. And I've always said with the UFO and paranormal stuff, go to the American Indians because that's the place to go to learn what it really is. A lot of the white folk stuff is just fear based. Some of the stuff is scary, but a lot of it's just fear based crazy. And maybe there's some truth to some of it, but there's crazy stuff in UFOs with the white folks like David Jacobs, who's been in trouble doing hypnotizing people and doing weird stuff to them that he shouldn't, assault and stuff like that. But I've always said when it comes to the paranormal, definitely the American Indians is the place to go. And I found comfort in that to deal with my experiences because God knows I've probably gone nuts and have PTSD from some of the weird stuff I've seen. Uh, and just recently, me and Christina were living at this house. She's a nurse, and we were taking care of her grandmother who transitioned now. We're doing hospice stuff, and a lot of stuff happened in that house. A glass blew up. That was really weird. I'd never seen anything like that. A crystal glass. We had something hit the bed late at night, and I got up with a flashlight looking around. I thought something fell off a shelf. Nothing fell off a shelf. Something hit our bed. Like, that was not normal. I don't know. It woke us up. We were about to go to sleep. It hit the bed, and we were like, ugh. And I got up with a flashlight thinking something fell. Nothing fell. There was no pets in there. And it was after her grandmother passed. I don't know if it was her grandmother. But one of the weirdest experiences there, I've had experiences with the sun where a lot of times the sun annoys me, but I don't try to say mean stuff about it because I don't want to upset it. but I can go let the white light fuel my body from like being at a window or outside. And I've had experiences in a gym where I saw like a pink orb over everybody. And another experience, I had never seen a gray alien in my life, but I saw this gray. I went outside, let that white light fill me, went into the house, and I saw like a gray being in the grandmother's room. And it was astral. It wasn't physical like us. It was almost like, is that from a sunspot or is that really like a being? But it kind of peeked out and looked at me. And then Christina late at night saw one standing over the bed over me. It looked like a gray that was kind of insect looking. And we've always wondered if it was like, draining us or something parasitical or something, but I don't know what it was. But there's been a lot of weird experiences. But like I said, the native culture to me is the place to go where you can learn about it and learn truths about it. And it's not so toxic as, white folk ufology. But so I guess what are some other? Oh, go ahead, Al.
Well, with the native culture, the one thing I've noticed, if you go to powwow, you're sitting talking to native people. If they say, if somebody tells you, "Well, I just saw my grandmother's spirit last night," nobody laughs at them because it's so ingrained and believed amongst the native people that we believe that the spirit world is closer than you think. It's not some far off place you go to. That the spirits and our loved ones are still here with us. They're watching over us. They're helping out. You mentioned seeing stuff in Georgia. Well, I wouldn't be a bit surprised about that, and I wouldn't doubt you because Georgia, being home in a Cherokee for so long, and then being their ties to that land and being drug off from their homes and sit on the Trail of Tears. So yeah, I imagine Georgia's got some very powerful spots and a lot of spirits there still, because they're that's their ancestral home. It's been there for a long time. I mean, they didn't want to leave that. So yeah, if I'm going to see, I can just see up, especially up in the mountains of Georgia, places there that are still considered sacred, where ceremonies have been done. There's a lot of energy in Georgia. I mean,
Oh yeah.
the fact that all these people were forced out and a fourth of the population died on the Trail of Tears. I mean, yeah, that's a lot of energy, and that connects a lot of stuff to the land. I mean, that's both good energy and bad energy going on. So yeah, that's pretty powerful.
Right.
Definitely, definitely. And I remember, like for 4-H, we went to Rock Eagle or something like that. It was like a mound in Georgia called Rock Eagle, I believe. I'd like to go to some more mounds. I have that Gregory Little book, which is like a cool encyclopedia of Native American mounds. I have it right here in Earthworks, which is pretty cool. It's kind of like a phone book for all those things.
Yeah, it
But I
is.
like, it's a good one. Uh, so when it comes to uh, native secrets, you got any more?
I got to be careful about what I share, what I put in books. I mean, when I did like certain ceremonies in Crota, I made sure that I didn't put anything that hadn't already been in print somewhere else.
Right,
And I
right,
didn't want to get in trouble with the
right.
tribal elders, but I still made this old medicine man very nervous. I
Hmm.
touched about stuff, and I was like, "Well, it's been in print. It's already been out there, Or James Mooney talked about this in the 1800s. I said, so I didn't want to get in trouble, give away tribal secrets, and I changed enough that nobody could say, "Okay, you described the pipe ceremony. Let me go out in the woods and do this word for word." No, I'm not going to do that. But yeah, I made a few people nervous, but I always double checked on things like that about giving away
Right,
secrets.
right.
I might hint at them. I might put some stuff that's general knowledge, but yeah, I'm not going to have anybody where they can open it up as a textbook and do ceremonies.
Right. Well, what I think is interesting about James Mooney is that you occasionally do run into some really intense stuff. I remember he's got this one, I can't remember which one of his books it said. I remember when I read it, my eyes kind of popped out. But it's like a prayer. He actually recorded word for word a prayer that someone gave him or that he heard, that was a, a prayer that was said to summon a horned an uktana, a horned serpent, as a
Yeah,
protection or a revenge against um, the priesthood of one of these mound cities. And it's really clear that it's in there. It's a curse. And I remember when I read it, I was like, "Oh, it was like, boy, I'm glad a lot of people that are reading this don't know how to do this because anyway, yeah, you do have to be careful with stuff like that. That's part of the reason why, when I tell stories, like I do tell some stories, some native stories in my book, Mysterious Beauty, because I'm talking about the Hudson Valley and sort of like the layers of paranormal narrative and experience. And so one of the first human layer, obviously, is the indigenous layer, but I don't tell anything that either hasn't been published or I haven't been given permission to tell. And I'm very clear about that, So
I know I came across that Thunderbird and Horned Serpent story, and there was a identical almost one in the India type lore that's very Garuda and something else. And that's a pretty weird story of like reptilians being underground and thunderbirds hunting them and being enemies. And you could see the same similarities from different cultures with these same beings. That's pretty cool when you come across stuff like that, and I love Norse stuff and things like that, and the native and the India stuff. I don't know much about it, but I've come across some pretty weird stuff where they're like intermingling their deities with Thor. Like there was some weird thing I came across. It was like one of their dudes was hanging out with Thor from the other situation from the Norse. So it gets pretty neat. Uh, and I've always found the fact that maybe Vikings and natives met on some level interesting, which is possible. Which
well,
I
it
mean,
well it did happen in Greenland. I
Greenland.
mean, in Greenland, yeah. I had my partner's eldest daughter went to Greenland for 6 months on to help with some scientific stuff. They're like, they're studying climate change and the melting of, the ice cap up there. And she said that, this isn't known much outside of Greenland, which she found very bizarre. But, the Vikings that went to Greenland, they didn't, Greenland is very different from Iceland, and they didn't actually survive there very well without the help of the indigenous people there. The indigenous people taught them how to do stuff, because their cattle would die. They couldn't plant crops. I mean, it just wasn't the same. And so there's actually a mixed culture there. It's indigenous and Viking, and then Denmark took over part of the island for a while. So there's some kind of a Danish overlay there. I can't remember if it's considered a Danish protectorate yet or not. I think they gained their independence pretty recently. But anyway, so you did in Iceland, in Greenland, and certainly parts of Iceland, you certainly did have Vikings and indigenous people, at least sometimes, mixing.
Did the Vikings stay nice, or did they screw them over like the Pilgrims, like those naughty Pilgrims?
They didn't screw them over like the Pilgrims because they were a minority. That's part of the reason why the Vikings didn't survive in North America proper, because they were a minority of people. They came at a time when there weren't gobs of people trying to escape Europe. Okay. So there weren't that many of them, and their technology was frankly no better than the technology of the people that they met. So the Vikings died. They died out or intermarried.
There's a lot of evidence in the history books and stuff about the connection between different cultures. I mean, you look at some of the dances that the Apaches do, the headdresses they wear are identical to some that are done in Africa. I mean, you look like you're wearing the same costume. James Billy, chief of the Miccosukee, he's a singer, and on one of his cassettes, he counts from 1 to 10. The words are identical to my wife's tribe in the Philippines, one of the little tribes. It shows the intermixture, and her culture is so similar to the Native American of this country. It shows that people did intermingle more than we thought back in the day. The Florida Calusa Indians had double hull canoes that were seaworthy. So there was a lot of this going on, this travel. It may have been a small amount, but it was enough to do the interchange of knowledge or of language. And some of this does mix up. I was shocked when I knew that the Miccosukee and Titirai in the Philippines had some of the same words. It shows that one time in history there was a connection. There was, maybe one person made it here or a couple people made it there, but it did happen.
What was that singer's name? Was it James Billy?
James Billy, yeah.
I looked it up. It said that Seminole Tribe of Florida politician who chaired. He did songs too.
He's got several cassettes out. He's very good. He was a gator wrestler too, one of the best I've ever seen until took his thumb off, and his wife wouldn't let him wrestle anymore.
Wow. Did you see that, or is that just history?
I saw him wrestle. I didn't see that, but I saw him wrestle a 9-foot 3-inch alligator at Rollins College in Winter Park, Florida, and he wrestled it in a tank of water, so it had the advantage to the gator. It was the biggest gator ever. What's the funny thing is, the night before, I'm sitting on the tailgate of its pickup truck, and it's nighttime, and I look, and there's this huge gator coming out of the back of his truck. I'm like, "Oh, James, get your gator." Now, James told me a story I'm going to share. It was kind of amazing. People where Disney is the town of Kissimmee, and people laugh if you pronounce it Kissimmee. They'll make fun of you. But the story that James Billy told me at Rollins College, he said back in the day in the Seminole War, it's the Second Seminole War, the men used to travel with the women, the Indian, the Seminoles. And one day they were left their women at the river. Said, "Go ahead, make dinner. We're going to go fight these white guys." Well, they lost against the white guys, and the soldiers knew that the women would be close by. So they tortured the men, and they found out the location, and they descended upon the camp with the women, intending on raping and murdering. And this one woman stood up, and there is no word in the Seminole language for rape. So she said, "Kissimmee, Kissimmee." In other words, do what you want with me and let the others go. And they did. They let the others go, and they raped and murdered her. Now, she was renamed because of what she did. They called her Kissimmee Billy, and she's buried down in South Florida. This is the chief of the Miccosukee Indians that told me this story. So the land where Disney sits with the high ticket prices and taking money from the tourists is actually sitting on Rape Me, Florida.
Well, that the ironies never cease. That's by the
Yeah.
by the way, just so you know, Al, I sent Jeffrey the link to where you can get where the chill came from. It's called Where the Chill Came From: Cree Wendigo Tales and
Okay.
Journeys.
I sent it to him.
Oh, very
I looked.
cool.
I looked up Jim Billy, and the first song it came up was Big Alligator. I'll have to
Good
check
song.
it out. I'm not. I grew up with R. Carlos. I always have trouble saying his name. Is it Nike? Nike? Nakai? He
Nakai.
does Nakai.
Nakai.
Okay.
Nakai.
Love his
Nakai.
music. And then was it Redbone? But I'm not familiar with too much more, so I'm always open to more native music for sure. I like it.
Well, there's Superman.
I've heard of that. I have. I have
Yeah,
heard Superman.
Superman is
I dig it.
great. I love him. He's great.
There was some.
Best hip hop.
I forget that. What was that show? Reservation Dogs. Did you get to see that? All that we had talked about it some with Al, and you saw it when. But there was some song about fry bread that was funny. That was those little two small dudes, and I forget their names right now. Funny Bone and Mike or something like that. The little dudes that are in that show, but they sing. That's pretty good. They did something on Howard Stern, Rain Dance or something, and it was one of those shows where you sing, and he was one of the judges. But they said afterwards it started raining outside when they did it. But they're in that Reservation Dogs show. Is pretty good. It's by the New Zealand guy that did What We Do in the Shadows and that pirate show that was just on HBO Max. Our Flag Means Death. I don't know if they're bringing that back, but I know. Let's see. It's we start at 5. We stop at 5 minutes till. It's 34 after. What kind of movies did you grow up when you were younger? I mean, what were some of your influences in horror or any kind of movie that you grew up with?
Well, let's see. That was back in the day when we had 3 channels. So I watched a lot of creature features. We had once a week. So I got to see some of the old classics with Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi. Abbott and Costello was on every weekend. So I watched all the Abbott Costello and all the Bowery Boy movies. And so I grew up with the comedies and the horror. And I love the creature features. We had our guest host. They had the creepy guy who introduced the movies was a guy named Seymour. So it was Seymour Presents. So
Nice.
a lot of some of the original Frankenstein and stuff I didn't get to see until later in life because they didn't show them on TV. I had to be happy with whatever I could see. So I remember like a Saturday morning, you started with a Evan Costello movie and the Bowery Boy movies, and you moved into a creature feature with often had Godzilla or something. So that's the kind I was raised on. And then in the afternoon, every day after school, you come home and get off the bus and you run in and watch Dark Shadows, the TV series.
Yeah. Wham's seen every one of those. I've seen a lot of bunch. Nah, I've seen a little bit, but
What of Dark Shadows?
Yeah,
Yes, I have watched every single episode of Dark Shadows.
Yeah.
It's like 1,000. It's like
1,243.
I have them, but it's been I've
Wow.
just been watching these like greatest hits with Barnabas. That's just like on a DVD or something.
Yeah,
That was pretty interesting.
I have to confess that having watched all of the episodes, that I was relieved when it was finally over. I mean, there are parts of the overall plot where it's really good, and really interesting, and certainly some of the characters are good, but it goes through the entire series goes through like 3 or 4 phases, where they've got the big overarching plot lines, and the very last one they just didn't do a very good job with. And then apparently what ended up happening at the very end is that they found out that they were going to be canceled. And so they had like literally 6 weeks to wrap up all of their storylines as best they.
Wow.
And so like the last batch of episodes suck. They're just terrible. But by that time, you're so committed. You've seen 1,200 of them or whatever that you're like, okay, fine. I'll just watch the rest of them. So you do, But
There
anyway.
was that Tim Burton movie. I don't know what he was thinking. It was okay, but it wasn't that great. It was a comedy. I was like, "What are you doing?"
Well, I think it's more of it was sort of a walk in nostalgia because when you watch Dark Shadows now, it's very campy. It comes off as funny. They didn't mean for it to be funny so much
Yeah.
then, but it comes off funny now. I mean, because they're especially like in the first couple years before they even really had a proper prop person. Stuff screws up on set all the time. You'll see someone moving across the stage, and they'll catch the mic boom moving, and you'll hear this thunk as people run into things, because it was all done live, and they didn't edit it, and so I think that's probably it's sort of a fond memory. I think that's what Tim Burton's rendition of it is. It's sort of,
Yeah,
there's kind of fondness there, you know.
I like those shows that are like that tell stories, like Tales from the Crypt, Creep Show. There's one me and Christina are watching Monsters that I think Tales from the Dark Side people did it. Even Steve Buscemi's in one of those, which I haven't gotten to that one yet. But it's like these little short creepy stories. It's pretty old. A lot of them are weird. I was like, what channel was this on? I don't even know what channel. It's a DVD set. It's called Monsters. I don't know if you've heard of it, Al, but it's pretty good.
Yeah.
It's been around for a while. And Tales from the Dark Side. I know there's a connection there to that. That's pretty interesting. But those little
Yeah.
anthologies.
Romero did Tales from the Dark Side. That was his
Right,
series. So yeah,
right,
it's pretty creepy. And like Dark Shadows, the best part's the beginning movie and the images. Because just
right.
that hearing that music, it creeps you out.
Oh yeah, the
Yeah.
opening credits are great. I mean, they're great, and there are moments. There are moments in that series that are amazing, that stayed with me as a child. That I still remember what their effect on me was because of how atmospheric it was. You know,
I try to collect all
Yeah.
those Hammer horror movies. I love those. The Hammer ones, from Hammer horror films, Peter
that
Cushing and all
well,
that.
yeah, all the vampire, the Dracula films.
Yeah, there's a lot of the reptile. There's a bunch of weird ones. The Gorgon, but yeah, those are he's in a lot of the Dracula ones and Frankenstein. I love those. They're supposed to be bringing those back on some kind of level at some point, but it was pretty good. Do you have any books where you've done short stories like an anthology, or has it always just been a whole book's the story? Al.
I do have a collection of short stories called Tribal Screams. Uh, the collection Tribal Screams is short stories. It came out a couple years ago. Includes a story, Grass Dancer, which was a Nebula Award nominee for Best Story of the Year. It got a great cover by Michael Broom, who actually works on Creep Show, the new series.
Cool, cool,
So
cool.
I'm currently working on more short stories. We're talking about Wendigo. I'm working on a Wendigo story right now because I wanted to do something with Swift Runner, who was
Mm,
a true person from history in 1890. He was hanged because he ate his entire family, his 6 kids, his wife, and his in-laws. And he said the
Wow,
spirit of a Wendigo forced him to do it.
hmm
So I thought that was
that's
kind of fascinating. You actually had a case where he ate everybody.
right.
I found I looked this stuff up. I found he's in Murderpedia. That's nice, but I found it. I had
Murderpedia.
never been to Murderpedia, but apparently it's a place. But yeah, I need. That's one of the ones I need to get. I need to get still. I'm gonna get that. There's like 2 or 3 I need to get. I know I have 4. I have 3 paperbacks in Coyote Rage, but I need to do some digging. Are all their books pretty much still available? I usually go to eBay and kind of hunt around, but they're on Amazon mostly, right?
Oh, yeah, you can find them. They're in the libraries. You can find them at eBay. Some are. I got new editions on. Let's see, Coyote Ray's got a new edition. Crota has a new edition, and Tribal Screams. Evil Whispers, a new audio edition just came out. They're all available in electronic editions, and then for the original paperbacks, you can get them for a couple bucks on eBay.
Cool. I need to dig for a few of them that I don't have for sure and get my fix, no doubt about it. And so I guess when it comes to some of the native things, the spirituality and the lore and the powwows, does the subject ever come up about what's kind of going on right now with the earth? Do they talk about anything? Like I know there's Hopi stuff that they talk about prophecies and stuff, but right now things just seem crazy as
Yeah.
hell. Like every day it just seems to get crazier.
Pretty
Now we
nuts.
got Putin threatening to nuke Ireland and us at the same time. Then you have people in America who I say love Trump will gooch and Putin and think he's doing the right thing in Ukraine because of Nazis. But by that theory, we have Nazis here, so we don't all deserve to die because there's some freak Nazis here. But it's just everything's crazy as hell. So I mean, does that subject come up with the Earth and everything?
I've been hearing predictions on this kind of what's going on now for years. I mean, I was fully aware about the Hopi prophecies ever since I was a kid, and we are living in definitely the time of the third shaking that was predicted in the prophecies. I've been hearing since I was 6 years old a warning about beware of the angry dragon when he raises the sleeping head, how the bear and the eagle and the dragon are going to get into it. So yeah, I've been, the elders and the old ones, the ones you can actually see, have been telling me this stuff for a long time. And I got tickled a couple years ago. People started talking about seeing spirits and ghosts. Everybody's talking about, oh, they're seeing ghosts, and more and more people talking about it. I said, yeah. I said, because the ghosts are all coming back because they want to be here during this crazy times. They don't want to miss the show, whether it's good or not. We're definitely living in interesting times, which is the Chinese curse. But what can you do about it? I've always teased about I wanted to be here to the end of the world because if you die at the end of the world, everybody goes with you. Then you can't complain. Although when you go to the St. Peter's pearly gates and have to take a number, it's going to take a while. But then I didn't realize that end of the world was going to be Russia, COVID, and everything else going on at one time. And we're talking, I was warned about famines when I was a kid, and you always think of famines, you think of places like Africa, but now you go to all these grocery stores and all the shelves are empty. So we got our own version of famines going on in this country right now, and it's every time you turn on the news, it says, more stuff's out, more stuff's going to be you can't find. I turned on the news tonight, and it said there's going to be a shortage in sriracha. I'm like, every time I turn around, there's something you can't find. So in a way, that's kind of a famine. If you can't find the food, you can't eat it.
Wow, a sriracha shortage. I better tell Christina about that. She
Yeah,
doesn't like
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
God,
Because
I know.
yeah, because of the chilies.
And then, yeah, so I like sriracha. I never had
There's
it
going to be a
before,
run on the store
Christina.
now.
Oh
Yeah,
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 they're already experiencing it. So
like toilet paper. But so the Red Dragons, China, they act like they want to come invade us. Like they act like they're planning on it, which that seems like it would be hard, like not easy. Like just with Russia and Ukraine, that seems like it's a pain in the ass for Russia on many levels. So I just can't imagine someone being dumb enough to come invade America, which they could do it. I don't know, but the Red Dragon definitely seems like them, right? Al, is that who they're talking
Yeah.
about? China and the
Well, when they said the sleepy dragon. I mean, it could be China, but it could also be North Korea too. That's their emblem
right,
too. So we
right.
don't know
yeah,
which one of these crazy guys is going to push the button first.
yeah, for sure. It's definitely creepy, and you wake up every day, Putin's threatening to blow us up. So it's not good. I saw Sean Penn on a Fox
Yeah.
interview, and he went over there and was hanging out with Zelensky and stuff and all that. And it's terrible. It's just sick. It's horrible. And it's just weird how people think it's okay that, like, there's weird stuff that says Putin is like, uh, they make him out to be holy, like he's destroying the satanic New World Order and like they're justifying it. And yeah, I don't like Nazis. Who does? But I don't think a whole place deserves to die just because there's some freaks there. By that rule, we'd all be dead. It's just crazy. It's scary. It's creepier every day, no doubt about it. Uh, I remember one story that Iroquois Supernatural. If you can remember, Al, look up that book. I've had them
Yeah,
on.
that's a
Uh,
great book.
It's called
That's a good book.
Iroquois Supernatural. But in it, I remember one of the dudes saying that they would have that corn harvest festival, and the little people would come up and they'd
Mhm.
trade stuff with them. I was like, really? Like, I mean, I believe it's possible, but when you back then I was younger, I was like, what? What? Sounds like some Wizard of Oz stuff. But they were good. There's some great stories in there for sure. I know there's truth to that stuff because, well, I saw three little skinny Jawas in the woods or something. I don't know what the hell they were, but I saw them. And at the time, I'd been reading a Celtic Otherworld book about fairies, and so maybe I kind of brought it on. I don't know. So I know there's truth to it, but some of the stories you hear, like, it's hard to believe at first, but when once you've seen it, or and been immersed in it, you're more open minded to it and everything. And there was some weird story going around. J.C. Johnson, this cryptozoologist, he's dead now. Man, so many people croak. But he got pneumonia. But there was a story about people seeing some kind of, what is it called? That winged dinosaur above a reservation. What's the one? The winged one?
Pterodactyl.
Yeah,
Pterodactyl.
yeah. And having sightings. It's almost like some of these places have portals above them. That's kind of what Skinwalker Ranch seems like. Like there's a portal or something weird above it, or something crazy like that for sure. What are there reservations near you? I mean, what tribes are near you, and are there reservations near you?
Uh, just no, because I'm in Central Florida. I'm in the Orlando area. I mean, the closest one would be the Seminoles down in South Florida, or they
Okay.
got where the casinos are, the Hard Rock and stuff. That's about the closest. But you mentioned about the pterodactyls and stuff. I had a friend of mine's out there on the res in South Dakota, and we were talking about things like that, and the stories of Walking Man, and which is the suicide god, and these
Mm.
different creatures. And his reply to me was, and he's an elder. He says, sometimes doors are opened and they never get closed again. And that was his answer to some of the stuff going on. I asked him about it because there's some weird stuff going on. He said, yeah, sometimes people open doors by accident, and they don't get them closed again. It allows stuff through. So we never know. Maybe there are things walking around, or we're letting stuff into this world. Maybe it's stuff we're messing around with we shouldn't be messing around with.
Well,
What is? Yeah.
or like the aliens have been telling contactees, for decades, or like and David Lynch talks about it in Twin Peaks, Return to Twin Peaks, that are messing around with nuclear energy and tearing up the very fabric of atoms themselves. I mean, that who knows that that can open doors too.
One thing I want to, what was the walking? What you saw the suicide god? Walking tall? What?
Out of Walking Sam out on Pine Ridge, there's
Mm.
been a rash of teenage suicides, and these kids are saying that there's this creature, and they call him Walking Sam, and that he's a suicide god who's luring these kids into committing suicide. And some are even saying he's approaching them through social media using the technology. There was a case where a group of kids were planning on doing a mass suicide, and they were stopped at the last minute. But these people believe it. I mean, the Lakota people on the reservation, the elders, are trying to get help. They've had meetings, council meetings, and they're saying they've actually seen this person out there, seen this being. I don't even say person. We don't know what it is. We're very tall, and sometimes they're wearing like a top hat,
It
walking around.
sounds like
It
Slender. It
almost
sounds like
resembles
Slender Man. It says Slender Man. Yeah,
Slender Man. Yeah, very
yeah.
similar. But these kids are actually committing suicide and they're leaving notes, and people finding out that this is what convinced them, got into their head to do it.
Hmm.
So there's a very real concern happening out on the reservations there. A lot's been written about it. So I was asking about it. They're like, yeah, about doorways being opening. So did we let something in? It's taking a toll on the youth on the reservation.
Yeah, and it's like with these crazy school shootings and stuff, like something feeds
No,
off of that
no.
stuff. I saw Matthew McConaughey speak on which is pretty compelling about that. It was really sad to hear all the stories about that, but you always have to wonder if something parasitical feeds off that stuff, which I'm sure it does on some kind of crazy level. Uh, but yeah, we got about 4 minutes. Al, it's been amazing. It's definitely one of my favorite interviews. I definitely love it and love your work, and it's great to have you here. What is your website? Let's give out your website.
Website's really easy. It's just www.owlgoingback.com. It's not fancy because I'm not smart enough to have a really pretty website. It's very simple. So, but it has the books and the stories listed there. I'm on Facebook and I'm on Twitter, so I'm fairly easy to find.
And the best place is Amazon to look for your books, or is there any other places that people can get them? Everywhere.
Amazon, I think they're at Barnes and Noble, bookstores, library if you don't want to spend the money, eBay if you want to do it for cheap. I mean, they're out there. Used bookstores. I got new editions coming out, and I got some of the older ones that are available. You can find them just about everywhere.
Definitely, and I always enjoy your Halloween posts. I love Halloween myself. Got Halloween coming up. I'd love to go to that Universal Horrors thing that happens in Florida. I've never been to it, but maybe one year. But yeah, I always look forward to your posts and look forward to your books. Thanks so much. It's been a great show. Thanks for being on.
Thank you for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks.
And definitely keep us in the loop on future projects, and I'll help promote any way I can. And thanks so much, everybody. You're listening to United Public Radio, 107.7 FM, New Orleans. Everybody have a great weekend. And I just watched Obi-Wan, the new show on Disney. It's good, but there's some things about it that are kind of, the last episode was kind of but the Darth Vader, James Earl Jones voice is nice to hear again for sure. All right, everybody. Have a great weekend. Thanks, Al. I've really loved it. Thanks so much.
Good to meet you.
Thank you, guys.
Take care.
Nice meeting you.
Yeah.
I'll send you the archive.
You too now.
Bye-bye. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Very cool. Thank you.